I'm gonna be honest, I was thinking of redoing the Narnia 1 review because I thought I didn't cover much of what I thought in that one. In the script writing process, I was just really not feeling it, and I felt like I covered enough of what I did. Plus, if I ever want to redo it again, I'll just do it in the future. Maybe, I don't know. So, if it isn't clear by now, I really love the Narnia movies. This was the franchise that I hold very dear to my childhood. Even watching them now with some of the flaws that I'm noticing, they still hold up as some solid, great fantasy movies. The same cannot be said for the third installment, Voyage of the Dawn Treader. I think this was the first time in my childhood that I ever felt disappointed after watching a movie, and it hurt even more because of how much I was invested in this franchise. With that said, do I think this movie is bad? Oh yeah! I would even go as far to say that I hate this movie. But it does have a few good things, so it's not terrible. But I still don't like it. Before I go any further, I think I should refresh you guys on some of the stuff this movie had problems with in its background. So, let's start with... After the release of the second movie, Prince Caspian, numbers in the box office did not meet so well with the overlords at Disney, leaving them to have an argument with their partner company, Walden Media, to what the budget would be for the third installment. This ultimately led Disney to backing out of the franchise and 20th Century Fox taking over. Wow, the guys who made the X-Men movies. What could go wrong? It wasn't just the studio that changed, but the writers changed, the director changed, almost everything changed except for the main cast. But hey, Fox is a $7 billion company. Surely they gave the movie a budget that's at least close or higher from its predecessor. Oh. Yeah, due to this, it led to the movie losing $80 million in its budget, which would explain why so much of the CGI looks so... off, and why there are less Narnians here in this movie. Seriously, am I the only one noticed that there were more humans than there were Narnians? Finally, the last struggle this movie had was the very thing it was adapting it from, the source material. Okay, I'll be real, I haven't read the book, but I did watch the BBC version, and that's pretty close to the book, so I'll try my best. So, from what I watched, the story seemed very episodic rather than an actual film. There was also not really a main antagonist, so I could see why it was such a task for them. Like Prince Caspian, they needed to make some changes to the movie, but I'll get to that later because this part is taking way too long. So, let's start with... I know it seems a bit off to talk about the music first, but that's what I hear when the movie starts, so whatever. So along with the director, Andrew Adamson, Harry G. Williams, the composer for the last two films, didn't return either, leaving David Arnold to take over as the new composer. And the music is... okay, it's not really that bad. There's some good pieces here, but the music is just really not that memorable. It usually took center stage before, but here it's just... alright. The only part that I actually like is when they play the Narnia theme, which is only in the long shot of the Dawn Treader and the closing end of the movie. Also, they keep adding this new track that feels like they're trying to turn it into the new Narnia theme. You know the one I'm talking about. Bro, like, when people hear Narnia, they're not gonna think of that. They're gonna think of this. It's kind of a bummer though because of how unique the track from the other movies were. But I guess it does fit the tone of this movie. Speaking of which, this movie is very different from its predecessors. You know how in the first movie it had that sense of wonder, but knew when to get serious, and in the second movie it got much darker? Here it feels like they're trying to go for a much younger audience. I'm not saying this franchise can't be for kids, even though it basically is, but this feels like a 2 steps back. The tone of the first two movies worked because it felt like it was reaching to a bigger audience than just kids. Let me give you an example. The Harry Potter movies got much darker and more mature as they went along, right? Well, imagine that in Deathly Hallows Part 2, the tone just goes completely back to how the first movie was. But even lower. That's what this feels like. Do you even remember what the stakes for the last two movies were? First movie, if the Pevensies don't save Narnia, it'll be enslaved forever in a snow prison. Second movie, if the Pevensies don't defeat the Telmarines, all of the Narnians will be exterminated for good along with them. Third movie, people get kidnapped by a fart. Yeah, that's it. Which leads me to talk about... The plot of this movie is pretty simple. There is some evil that is terrorizing the world, and the characters gotta beat it. Something that Michael Apted, the director taking over for this movie, rest in peace, said this in an interview.
Clearly the flaw in the book is there's no motion to it, no engine driving it. It's a very casual picaresque book, and that would be catastrophic in a movie like this. So we went into the next book and discovered there was some stuff missing in the narrative.
That is a really smart decision. Making your movie's narrative much smoother is a good idea when you're making it into a movie. The problem is, there is no engine. The story is still very slow-paced, it doesn't have as high a stakes as the other movies did, and you know what? I'm just gonna say it. Boring! It's unbelievable how a world full of talking animals, mythical creatures, and magic could fabricate such a story this boring. It's such a weak plot, and it takes so long for the characters to find out what the real threat is that by the time they actually do, the movie is almost over. Most of this movie is just about the characters going from one island to another because the plot demands it. Remember how I said that they had to make some changes in the book? Yeah, well, they changed basically the whole plot. Basically, they added this fog that kidnaps villagers and makes men bad? I'm not joking. That's actually what it says here. So the characters have to find 7 swords that will defeat the fog, even though it's never explained where the fog came from or how exactly these swords can magically defeat it. Prince Caspian may not be a great adaptation, but at least it was able to follow the story of the original and give its characters clear arcs. This movie also tries to do that with its characters, but fails. While they try to give them something to learn, it ends up leaving them underdeveloped. Most of the time, it feels like the writers don't even know what to do with them. I don't even know what the hell Edmund's arc is supposed to be in this. Is it him trying to live up to Peter? Is it his stupid unnecessary rivalry with Caspian? Is it his fear of the White Witch? Pick one! Speaking of Edmund, his character feels like such a 180 from how he was in the last film. He may not have had that much screen time, but you could clearly see that he had grown and matured from how he was in the first movie. Here, he's just a plain salty boy and is even more immature than he was in the first movie. So yeah, Edmund sucks in this movie. Caspian has this whole thing about his dad and conflicting over his kingdom, but it never really shows that he learns from it. Are you seeing what the problem is here? These characters are given somewhat good arcs, but they only meet halfway through the movie. The only one you can say that has some development is Lucy, but her arc doesn't really add anything to the story and doesn't really change anything she would do afterwards. All she does is give advice to this little girl and that's it. Speaking of which, the side characters in this movie are just so bad. The last 2 movies had fun side characters that helped our main characters through the story, but these guys barely do anything and have little screen time. Can you actually tell me the name of this little girl and her dad? Can you actually name this freaky looking minotaur? Can you actually tell me the name of this bald dude who just scowls through the whole movie? I don't even understand what the whole point of adding that little girl and her dad was. They do pretty much nothing, and I think they were supposed to empathize with them because they're missing mom/wife, which I don't. I don't empathize with them because guess what? They are barely in the movie. They feel like background characters. All of this ultimately leads to an anticlimactic final act that feels empty in stakes and characters. I honestly don't even understand what the White Witch is doing here. She served her purpose in the last 2 movies. Her appearance here just feels so unnecessary. Why does this movie keep bringing up stuff from the last 2 movies but making it worse? Man, is there anything good I can say about this movie? Any particular character that might be able to save it from its mediocre storytelling? Yes. Yes, there is. And that character is Eustace. Yeah, I bet not what you were expecting, huh? So I wanted to save the acting for this part since it has something to do with the character that I'm talking about. So here goes. The acting is... it's not terrible, but it doesn't feel like the actors are giving it their all. I mean, after this movie, the actor who played Edmund quit to pursue another career, so that should say something. This does not apply to Eustace, played by Will Poulter. I'm sure you all know Will Poulter. He's been in the Maze Runner movies, that one movie that I'm just using an example of but I can't pronounce, and where he's more popularly known on the internet.
You guys are getting paid?
They're not, but you sure are. This guy just makes this character feel so alive. From his angry little walks to his outbursts. He also just gets a few chuckles out of me every now and then. Like that time when he fainted from that Minotaur, though I would have the same reaction if I looked at that. I know a lot of people seem to find this character really annoying, but when your movie is filled with bland acting and underused characters, you take what you can get. I also really like his dynamic with Reaper Chief. They slowly grow from disliking each other to actually becoming good lads. Reepicheep is also just a delight to watch. I didn't even notice that they switched him out with Simon Pegg, but he still does a pretty good job, and it's also kind of funny to see him play two rodents with a blade. He's charming, he's adventurous, it's just great every time he's on screen. He's also the only character CGI who actually looks good. I honestly would rather want a movie about these two than the so-called adventure we're getting for this movie. But back to Eustace. His character development is the only one that works. He learns to become less selfish, lending his help to the crew and ultimately saving the day. That's really good. I wish the other characters could get that treatment. There is one negative aspect to him. It's when he becomes a dragon. It's not the turning into a dragon that I have a problem with. I like how they expanded on that idea. It actually becomes more useful to the story. It's just the way the dragon looks. Like, wow. Oh, wow. That is just not aged well. In some shots, it looks pretty good, but for the most part, it's just no. Alright, let's talk about the ending. It's pretty good, mostly because the movie is almost over. Aslan appears and looks really different from how he looked in the last two, but again. Caspian does the whole thing about choosing his kingdom, the two best characters say goodbye, and Aslan tells the two younger Pevensies that, okay, I know a lot of people are probably going to hag on me for this, but here goes. I know the meaning behind what he says here, and it's really touching. But this ironically has to be the funniest shit I've ever heard in these movies.
In your world, I have another name. You must learn to know me by it. That was the very reason you were brought to Narnia. That by knowing me here for a little, you may know me better there.
Hold up. So you're telling me you kidnapped these kids, put them in a position of power to fight a war, having them almost die, probably giving them PTSD just so they can know your name? What? What is wrong with you? What kind of god are you? God of War seems like it. Okay, but looking at this unironically, it's alright, just a little too on the nose for me, if you know what I'm talking about. So then they return back to their world, put the painting back, and then the movie ends with some genuinely nice credits that show pictures of the book. So that was Dawn Treader. In my eyes, Voyage of the Dawn Treader is such a downgrade for the franchise. The other two movies had this style that just worked and made this world feel so alive. Here we're just left with a movie that has hollow locations, underdeveloped characters, and overall just loses the magic and flair the last two had. It doesn't even feel like I'm watching a Narnia movie, it feels like I'm watching something completely different, and that's not a good sign. It's such a damn shame because for a franchise like this that has so much to offer, it's just a disappointment of how this turned out. However, knowing how the book series actually is, I don't really blame the writers. But hey, they got lucky with the first two movies, so who knows, maybe if Disney didn't chicken out, this series actually could have been something. I was gonna give this movie a 4 out of 10, but Eustace and Reepicheep just make it enough for me to sit through this whole thing. So overall, 5 out of 10. So now that everything is said and done, my last word to this movie is... Because now my new headcanon is the first two are the only ones at existence, and now it's a happy ending. Yay! Speaking of which, we'll finally conclude this franchise review with the second film of the series, Prince Caspian. Oh man, I can't wait to turn to this movie and reveal it for the disaster that it is. Except not because this movie's really great. Okay, bye!